Hey everybody, Red Mage here. Welcome back to this series where I go through different RPG products that I have and give them a flip through and review. I usually say quick, but this one I don't think will be quick. This is going to be a bit of a different video. I have a bunch of Megadungeons, and in the past I've gone through them very carefully after having read through them and talk about them and analyze them and all that stuff. But I have a whole bunch, and I'd like to kind of get into them a little bit more. So this is one that I haven't looked at. I haven't looked at it at all, and I kind of wanted to give a first impression, sort of what do you experience when you're first reading through it for the first time? What do I experience when I'm reading through the first time? So it's not going to be as detailed or as probably insightful as a deeper analysis that I'm sure there's out there and lots of reviews, but it'll be more my first impressions of this dungeon. Dwimmermount is what I'm going to be going through first. I might do this for a few videos, depending on if people like this or if they're like, nah, do the prep first and then go through it much more slowly and carefully. So we'll see. But this is a 13 level mega dungeon and wilderness sandbox for ACKS, Adventurer Conqueror King, which I think has now on its second edition, but this is for the older edition. But it is also it seems like it's compatible with a lot of different systems, OSR games. Now, a 13-level mega dungeon and setting sounds quite massive, and this is a 428-page PDF. Now, basically, once I read Arden Vul, the Halls of Arden Vul, every other mega dungeon seems relatively small compared to Arden Vul. But I think this is, 13 levels and 428 pages. This is not a small adventure. I'm really looking forward to looking through this. I know almost nothing about this. Basically, I went on Drive-Thru-RPG and I searched Mega Dungeon, and I found a whole bunch of things on there that some of them were more reasonable, some of them seemed kind of ridiculous, some of them seemed like things I wasn't interested in. But I got a bunch that seemed of interest, that seemed in the category. Now, one of the things I noticed was that this had a lot of mixed reviews on DTRPG. The overall star rating was in the middle somewhere, I think. So I'm interested to see why that's the case, because it's a big mega dungeon. Usually those are the sorts of things where I'm like, hey, the more the merrier, right? But we'll see. This was released, it looks like, from 2012, 2014, or at least this newest edition. A whole bunch of people worked on this, especially artists. And the art on the cover looked pretty good. Looks like I'm pretty, so far so good, I suppose. But 10 pages in. Section outside. Section 1, you have the Dwimmermount. So here's the map of the Dwimmermount. 1 hex equals 5 miles or 2 leagues. 5 mile hexes, I've seen a few products that do 5 mile hexes. But I think the standard kind of has become either 3 or 6. In defense of the 5 mile hex, is it defense of the 3 mile hex? I forget. There was a blog post a while back it's kind of an important one for people to read. And I forget what the actual number was, but I think a lot of people have adapted kind of the 3 to 6 mile hex. That's what I prefer. I prefer 3 and 6 miles. 6 miles for a bit of a bigger map, 3 miles for the closer zoomed in map. I usually use 3 mile maps for my west marches. I use 6 mile maps for more traditional campaigns. 5 miles, it's an interesting number. The map looks pretty straightforward. It looks like just a couple of locations. And it looks like probably an overview map, right? You have a key here, but if the mega dungeon is just Dwimmermount, and you're not really doing a hex crawl, we'll see, I suppose. But usually you'd expect there to be more locations and maybe a legend in terms of A1 or something like that. But you don't really see that here. Chapter 1, Introduction. A whole bunch of designer's notes, how to use this book. At some point I should really read through this. Publisher's notes and all that. When I first read through the Halls of Arden Vul, I was kind of like, I didn't really want to read through that introduction, and I read a little bit of it. It seemed, I said at the time, it seemed a little pompous. It seemed a little kind of full of itself. And then I kept going through Arden Vul, and I was like, oh, actually, they kind of deserve to be. They're not full of themselves. They're being honest about how impressive this is. I've tried to lean into reading more introductions and taking them, seriously, and not people commenting on their own work is often difficult. But yeah, so we'll see. It looks like an overview, a kind of casual, not casual, but hand-drawn overview of the dungeon. And it's got that form that I think we often have seen in a lot of Megadungeons, right? Where there are different ways going down, it looks like, but not a lot of side-to-side connections, right? So you start here and you can go here or here, right? You start at 1, you can go to 2, or 1 part 2, it looks like, right? I think those are tiers, how deep they are. So you can go to 2A or 2B, essentially, right? And then you can go from, if you're at 2A, you're going to go to 3A. And then there's a few alternate places from there. One can also go all the way down to, level 5 or something like that. Okay, so there's some connections there, but it looks like each zone is maybe more isolated and self-contained than interconnected. Now, I wonder how many different connections there are going to be between each floor. That's a really interesting element. Now, one of the things I really liked about the Halls of Arden Vul, right, is that not only are there usually multiple ways down from one floor to the next, but there are often ways of skipping past multiple floors, and there are lots of different entrances that access the different levels of the dungeon at lower levels. So, I wonder if you're going to see something similar to that here. I don't know. Here's the history of Dwimmermount. Looks like a pretty good overview. It has the era down below and how long that lasted. That's cool. That's cool. Again, it's nice to know there's even kind of at a glance how long the past has been. And so you have all this paragraph if you want the details. You have all the kind of nitty gritty, but you've got the short eras off to the left there. That's cool. And then it looks like it's further broken down here in a kind of a helpful bullet pointed way. Numbered paragraphs. That's helpful. Thulians. It's a cool name. Centuries after they were first created by the great ancients, the servitors projected their voices into the minds of barbarian men from the Isle of Thule in the north. Presenting themselves as gods, they taught the Thulians much lost knowledge and granted them clerical magic, unseen since the days of the great ancients. The Thulians created the astrological calendar to understand the waxing and waning of these voices from the astral plane, founded the great church to better preach their messages, and used these teachings of these ancients to start civilization on its way back toward law. Interesting. So there's some false gods pretending to be gods, some ancients pretending to be things that they aren't. And I wonder how detailed that will be as we go through. There's a Dwimmermount. What is that? Hireling and henchman sheets. Nice. Rules for adventuring. Creating characters. Men. Dwarves. Wow. Only men worship gods and have access to divine magic. Nevertheless, dwarves do revere supernatural beings whom they call the Makers. As their name suggests, dwarves believe that the Makers created them untold ages ago to delve deeply beneath the surface of the world. Once the Makers spoke regularly and directly to the dwarves, but those days are long past. No dwarf knows precisely when the Makers stopped speaking to them or why, though most believe it occurred sometime after the tumult, when some dwarves turned away from the Makers and threw dwarven society into chaos. So, interesting. Dwarves can't, no other races can cast spells. Or divine magic, it looks like. That's an interesting world, piece of world building and lore. You have elf. Those intelligent humanoid beings who can claim descent from the Eld, the Eldritch Empire. The Eld nobility retreated en masse back to the Red Planet. So elves, it seems like, are aliens. They're more alien-like than Fae. That's pretty cool, and it's a different take on them. I was actually thinking about this in terms of Dolmenwood. I was hoping to maybe make a distinction between the elves that are related to the Fae and the elves that are sort of more like high elves in my particular Dolmenwood world. And one of the things that's clear about the Dolmenwood world is that there are other worlds, right? You have for example, the weird that befell Drigbolton, which is set in the Dolmenwood world, and that has kind of an alien thing, a meteor that crashes down, and there's life forms on it, and there's some indication in places of Dolmenwood that there are, far planes and far realms and things like that. And especially if I'm creating that massive world with the Underdark that's attached to it from my ultimate OSR game, then there's lots of, mind flayers and Illithid and aboleths down there, and I always think of them as aliens. So I wonder if making elves more like Vulcans would be a way to go, right? So there's the high elves, and people call them elves colloquially because they don't know the distinction, because they just see kind of tall people with pointed ears, or they have kind of similar, superficial similarities, and so people call them all elves. But they're actually not. They're from a different origin and something like that. So I wonder, this looks like it has something to do there with that. So I could kind of maybe go that way. Elves are immortal. They can be killed, and certain ailments may slay them, but they never die of old age. That's cool. I like elves that don't die of old age. I like that. Makes them very different in the game. When adventuring the world of Dwimmermount, there are 12 basic character classes to which men may belong: Assassin, Barbarian, Blade Dancer, Cleric, Explorer, Fighter, Mage, Priest, Shaman, Thief, Venturer, Warlock, and Witch. Each of them function as noted is in the main book. And then there are the Divine classes, the Clerical classes. And I think it sounds like the only, neutral and chaotic humans and demi-humans who possess Divine casting ability are discussed later on. Oh, okay, so there are other ways to cast. Here we go. The various clerical classes are generally available only to humans of lawful alignment, generally. So maybe there's a way of changing that a little bit, or adapting that if you want to. Neutral or chaotic casters. Interesting. It's interesting that shamans, witches, blade dancers, maybe this is an element of the Adventurer, Conqueror, King system, which I don't really know. But that they all kind of seem to go into the divine casting category. Neutral, divine, and lawful, like shamans, witches, warlocks, clerics, priests, blade dancers. Interesting. They all kind of fall into the same category there. Rules for paladins, it looks like, as well. This is all interesting stuff, but I'm kind of just interested in the dungeon itself. Okay, so you got a D20 table for rumors there, Dwimmermount rumors. Only D20, and that's not that many for a Megadungeon. Now, again, maybe I'm just comparing things to Arden Vul, but 20 seems like it's going to be, you're going to finish it pretty quick. Especially if every character gets a rumor. Maybe if it's every player. But it seems like it would be easy to come up with your own rumors, especially given these sort of dwarven beliefs about Dwimmermount, elven beliefs about Dwimmermount. It'd be sort of a thing you could give players in addition to the rumors, so it might be a bit more variation. Oh wow, there's a bigger map of the wilderness. I might be wrong about this. It looks a lot like the outdoor survival map. I don't think it's exactly that. But I wonder if that's influenced by the outdoor survival map. It kind of looks like it, a little bit to me. Maybe it's just similar qualities. Maybe it's similar in sort of overall look, but I don't know. I would be interesting to kind of match that up to the outdoor survival map and see how influenced by it is. That would be cool if it were. Chapter 4, Vicinity of the Dwimmermount. So here's the regional map and a little piece of information about each of the nearby locations. 24 points of interest located within the Dwimmermount region have been detailed below. Okay, so 24 different locations. And there are some that are more detailed than others. Population centers, ruins, some NPCs that are in the different locations. Whoa, what's that? Oh, an overview of the different settlements, I see. Muntberg, Gosdrunen, the Outyard, an immense subterranean complex hewn out of the Thunderhome Mountains and populated by giants. That's cool. With massive, giant underground city. It's a cool idea. Demand modifiers. What do people want there? Interesting. You're going to be buying and selling trade goods. That's an interesting take on things. Here's Muntberg, probably the it's the I'm sure it's the base of operations, meaning Mountain Castle, is in a now obscure local language, was built during Thulian times to guard the trade routes between the Wintertops, at the other end of which lay Winterberg. Of relatively minor importance these days, Muntberg has grown considerably since the fall of the Empire. Now under the authority of the city-state of Adamas, Muntberg still guards the trade route, which is considerably less active than it once was. But its primary purpose is to keep an eye on Dwimmermount and the adventurers and cultists that are drawn to the ancient citadel. There's a bunch of named NPCs here, which is cool. Interesting piece of art there. The Green Dragon Inn. How many worlds have a Green Dragon Inn in them, I wonder? Probably quite a few. There's only one dragon in Bywater, and that's green. Imperial sympathizers, the Charmer, Inquisitors, vampires. Ooh. Servants whisper that key personnel in Munburg have ceased going out in daylight and are no longer visible in mirrors. These new vampires may be thralls created by Sitas in his scheme to gain power, or they may have been persuaded by Cyrus to accept undeath in order to better defend the fortress against the threat of Termax. See the Ossuaries, level 6A, rooms 15 and 32 for details on these master vampires. Okay, cool. A great little piece of art there, leading to the doors of Dwimmermount. So far, what would I say before we get to the overview of the dungeon? Just looking at the overview of the world, it seems totally serviceable. It doesn't strike like the layout is, you're going to have to read the whole thing. You're going to have to put together particular factions or, there are NPCs and I'm sure some details about what they might want in the different paragraphs, maybe potential quests into the dungeon there. But there isn't a really... for example, in the Halls of Arden Vul, again, I'm going to be comparing a lot to the Halls of Arden Vul, and I think it's an obvious comparison in a lot of ways, right? I think almost any Megadungeon has to be compared to Arden Vul now that it exists. It's kind of like everything has to be compared to Tolkien, right? Every fantasy work. I forget who it was. Was it Neil Gaiman? Somebody said, fantasy, or Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien are to fantasy what Mount Fuji is to artists in Japan. Either it's present in the background, or its absence is noteworthy, or the artist is painting from atop Mount Fuji, right? And that's a great comparison. And I think that that's sort of something similar, and I think it'll become more similar as time goes on to Arden Vul, just because it is kind of the, in my opinion, the apex of Megadungeoning. Megadungeoning. So, what would I say else about this world? Again, having very briefly reviewed it, but I'll be honest, guys, this is how I first approach a work. When I first read through a book, this is what I do. I kind of click through each page, my eye is drawn to particular headings, I might read a paragraph of text here or there, and I'm trying to find things that stand out to me and draw me in. And if I read through, a half of a book, a PDF, and I don't find anything that's like, ooh, that's really cool, and I want to read more about that, then I tend to just let it go. There's too much out there that's interesting to kind of, do homework, right? And to work through a product and be like, man, this is amazing. Like Arden Vul, its sheer size made me want to push through it. And then once I read through some of that intro work and the maps and things, I was like, oh, I gotta see this. So far, I haven't had anything like that from Dwimmermount. It seems like it's a totally serviceable overworld, has a great, cool history. There's some things in the history that are interesting, but nothing that's like, whoa, that's really, really cool. But again, I haven't actually looked at the dungeon yet, so I have no idea whether I'll be super drawn in. And this idea of the vampires popping up in town, that's cool. That's a cool idea, and I would like that to be maybe that's one of the things that I would probably do if I were to make this. Okay, so the Dwimmermount is approximately 3 miles to the northwest of Munburg, so a very quick trek from the city to the dungeon. I mean, you're coming back and forth. It's not that far into the wilderness, which is great. I found when I ran whenever I run West Marches, that the more distant a dungeon is, even if it's pretty cool, just simply the players will be more inclined to do even a little bit more boring dungeons that are closer to home first. Just because they feel, well, if we get in over our heads, we can easily retreat, and we can always change our minds later, and we don't have to do a whole bunch of back and forth. It's just, yeah. We won't spend half the adventure traveling. So I like that it's only 3 miles away. So there's arcane barriers, which prevent you from getting into the dungeon, at least through certain doors. Through certain entrances into Dwimmermount. So, okay, that's interesting, right? So that means probably as you go forward, you're going to be breaking through these barriers and therefore a little bit like unlocking the keys, right? Unlocking the dungeon as you move forward. That's cool. A way of, I imagine, bypassing just not having to go through the same starting zone every time. Different dungeons do it different ways. Arden Vul, one of the things they do is they have a few dungeons like that, but they also have like very just hidden entrances you're not going to find until later. You might find them, but it'd be very unlikely to find the entrances to the deeper levels early. And if you persist and you find them, then you kind of have a different way in from the beginning. Here you have an overview of the different ways through the barriers. That's pretty cool. So you have the red doors, the stone wrought stairs. Oh, and who passage is granted to, or how passage is granted to through these portals. That's kind of cool. Natural smoke to moonlight. When an arcane portal is correctly activated, to dwarves. Dwarves can always use the stone wrought stairs. Okay, that's cool. And it tells you where it goes to and how to get in there. That's nice. That's nice. Okay. The dungeon construction, what it's made of, and by chronology. That's really interesting. Again, it's sort of and the materials that are made there. Okay, and what their value is. That's also interesting. So you can learn how, if you just want to take stuff apart, then you know how much it's worth per pound right away. Some players are very likely to just start dismantling the dungeon in terms of and carrying it off with them and making money from it. I have a player who is 100% that way. If he sees that the dungeon itself, like the walls are made of something interesting, he's like, all right, let's start excavating. The different cataclysms that have affected it, how the doors are built, the environment was built with a sophisticated air circulation system intended to keep the interior atmosphere pleasant, temperate, and fresh. So the air has a stale quality to it, breathable but not pleasant. Okay. That's good to know. I think that's all you need to know in terms of the background there. The different machines in Dwimmermount. So it seems like a pretty good overview of the different levels. I think I would probably be more interested in getting a list of factions first, before I see a bunch of like how the pipes work and stuff like that. Yeah, an overview of like factions would be probably better than this other stuff first. But again, maybe a nitpick if there is a section on factions later. Here are some mysteries. Oh, that's kind of cool. Let's see. The judge will find many more cases where some aspect of the dungeon is explained only lightly or not at all. These are the areas that can benefit greatly from further expansion through the judge's creativity, often aided by other published material. So that's always good. I mean, leaving things open for further development by the DM, that's cool. And you get the different mysteries of Dwimmermount laid out. Okay, and here's the dungeon itself with an illustrated way of looking at it. That's really cool. Now it's on a few pages and it's sideways. I think when I got this, I got a whole bunch of files in addition to this. I think. I'd have to go back and look. But that would be nice to have these things separate. Now you could always see, in PDF, you could always just separate them out. Some great art. Okay, there we go. Okay, Chapter 7, Factions in the Dungeon. Good. A whole section on factions. Simply listing all the factions in a 13-level Megadungeon can be daunting. Yeah, that makes sense. Broad categories. Remnants, relics, locals, foreigners, and outsiders. That's cool. So the different groups, and there's a whole bunch. Wow, there's different verses. The custodial remnants, which are dragons, dwarves, undead servitors. The degenerate remnants. The Darim, the ghouls, the shadows, the Tarim. The imprisoned remnants. Demigods, demons, necrolites, and were-rats. There are relicts, and so the difference here, let me read through them. Okay. Remnants are creatures that have been alive or undead ever since the dungeon fell 2 centuries ago. Okay. Relics are beings who have been spawned in Dwimmermount in response to its recent unsealing. Okay, so awaken the beastmen, the Thuliids, the constructed, the dwarves, servitors, and undead, and the vat-grown beastmen, sapient rats. Locals are generally men who grew up in and around the city-states surrounding the Dwimmermount. They've been going in and out. Okay. You have foreigners. And then you have outsiders from the realms beyond. The astral outsiders, interplanetary outsiders. Interesting. That's a cool way of doing it. Now you have the factions by dungeon level. And what level they're present on. That's good. I like that a lot. The factions, kobolds, spiders, orcs. So the spiders are astral outsiders. Gross. They're the spawn of Arak Naka. There's a demon on 3C. That's cool. The leaders and the leader's location, and what their enemies are on the next page, if they have particular enemies. Spiders are allies of the kobolds. They have no enemies. This is really helpful This is the sort of thing I would print off and leave in my binder or on my screen. And then you get an overview of the factions by level. Yeah, okay, this is super cool. This is super cool. Very helpful, very clear. Now, I don't know, I haven't read through these factions. So this is more of an impressions of the layout and the format of this book than the details. But the factions seem like the kind of factions you'd want. Minotaurs, were-rats, dwarves, ghouls, hobgoblins, zombies, outsiders, giant spiders, Termaxians, whatever those are, Dwimmer dragons. Ooh, that's cool. Troglodytes, Thelidu, which again, whichever those are. Necrolites, the sleeping god, Mongrelmen. Okay. So again, looking at the details here is going to be important in terms of whether you like the actual tone and the execution, or rather the tone and the writing and the ideas behind the factions. But the layout, excellent. This is very helpful. You can read through this, you get a sense of the different factions and how they're going to be working as you go through. I think I have the pages off. I used 2-page view and I did show cover, and it's kind of not quite right in terms of the section divisions. Okay, there you go. There's a quick page reference for dungeon levels now. Is it hyperlinked? It is not. Oh, it is. Never mind. Good. That's very cool. Okay, so it looks like you go to level 1, but level 0 is actually much later on in the book. In fact, it looks like it's one of the last things that's actually detailed in the book. So going up to the very tippy top of the mountain is not the first thing you're going to do. You go to level 1, and then from there you're going to go down. Seems like most likely. Okay, and so there are some different avenues in and out. So it looks like there's different ways of getting to level 7, maybe level 9. And I'm assuming there's more levels down below. It looks like there are different multiple paths from level 2B down to level 3B. One can go to 2A, 2B, or down to 4. 3A is kind of isolated by itself. It doesn't have any other, looks like, any other exits or entrances. So really, to get to 4, you're either going from 1 all the way down or going through the levels slowly. Same thing looks like it's true from 5 to 7, etc. Okay, cool. So it's got some connections and things going on between the levels of the dungeon. And here we go. This is level 1, the Path of Mavors, Mavors. There's a good overview. You get the map right away. Now let me see. Is there going to be maps throughout? No, there are not. Okay. So you're going to have to keep it open or have a map book separate. But that's okay. That's okay. It's not a big deal. So wandering monsters, and then the overview of the actual locations. Now let's look at the layout of the dungeon here, first of all. So you're coming in. I assume you're coming in at room 1. Yep, to surface. Come to room 1, there's a lot of different ways to go. It looks looped. It looks like it's really well looped. Like there are 4 different quadrants. The cave systems connect different ways through. Yeah, that looks good. I like the layout already. It's got that nice cross section, and then it's divided into quarters. So level 1 is a solid section with loops and then loops within loops. So it looks like a pretty solid design. And there's a few isolated, dead ends and things like that, but it's got a good overall flow. And it looks like, again, you can pick right away 4 different directions. You can go south, you can go east, you can go west, you can go north from that room. And yeah, okay, cool. Let's see. I'm going to read through a couple of these paragraphs of these rooms. Let's look at the entrance chamber. Ancient and smooth-worn stairs descend from the red doors into the entrance chamber of Dwimmermount. The room contains 5 doors, 2 of them side by side, and 6 marble statues. All the doors are made of hard oak reinforced with steel, and none are locked. 5 of the 6 statues depict distinct male figures in different poses wearing archaic Thulian dress, but all have with the exact same head and face, that of a haughty, bearded man with piercing eyes. Clerics and others with religious knowledge may recognize 5 of the figures as representatives of the Thulian gods, Caint, Dorn, Mavers, Tenon, and Typhon, and the identical heads as being that of Termax. These heads are not original to the statues and can be removed with a successful Force Doors roll. For more information on these removable heads and the boons that can be granted by replacing them with the original, and see the overview of the dungeon. The 6th statue depicts an attractive but hard-faced woman in plain garb. This is Serana, Term's lover, who legends say disappeared shortly before his apotheosis. Okay. Reading through paragraph text. That's what looks like we're going to be doing for this dungeon. And if we go forward, that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be reading through. There are a handful of, there's bolding at times, italics at times. Looks like some stat blocks are set off. Occasionally when there's a sequence of things like the different memories, they're set off. But mostly you're going to be reading through the whole paragraph and figuring out how to describe it to your players yourself. That is a mixed blessing. You see it in a lot of Megadungeons, right? You see it in a lot of places. So I can't criticize it exactly. It's just not my design anymore. It's kind of that old... It's not my favorite design, I should say. It's that older, kind of more ponderous style. It's classic in that regard. But I think, given this was released 2013, 2012, that's a lot over 10 years ago. So the design, interest, design sensibilities have shifted over those years. So for being the era that it's from, I think that's totally acceptable. And you see that with, you see that with Arden Vul. You see that with a lot of other places. Arden Vul does have a little bit more that seems like it's set off. You have, treasure set at the end. You have some things that are set aside, set apart there. Now let me see, is this thing hyperlinked when you go to particular room numbers? Yes, it is. Okay, so that's a really cool bit. The individual page numbers are hyperlinked, which is something Arden Vul does not do. At least the maps aren't hyperlinked and all that. So that's a really cool touch because that'll help you navigate quite a bit. You can go to new magic items, jump to the end, see the magic item in particular, and then jump back. Very helpful. Okay, so I approve. I approve. Let me read another one of these chambers, one of the longer ones. Let's see, the antechamber. No, let's do the trophy room. This large room is empty of furnishings, but indentations in the walls, shelves, and brackets all give evidence of the former presence of plaques, statues, and other similar ornaments. These trophies commemorating Thulian military victories were looted long ago or removed to other parts of the fortress. Recent additions to the room are the bodies of two dwarves, their corpses turned to stone in the manner of the dwarves of Dwimmermount. The dwarves wore still serviceable chainmail and carried intact battle axes, but these can only be removed by shattering their stony forms. The deceased dwarves were members of a party that entered by way of the dwarven entrance cave, room 30. 3 other comrades died in the armory, room 16. One of the surviving members of their party is being held captive in the magician's quarters, room 68 on this level, while the other 2 survivors are being held in room 22 of the laboratory on level 2A. So those aren't hyperlinked, I wish they were. Okay, so you get a description of what the room once was and what has kind of happened to the room, and I think stuff like that is interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I would want a ton of writing like that, telling you what the room used to be, if it doesn't have any immediate impact. Like if these relics were useful, if these trophies were useful, or if bringing them back did something, then I could see being a bit more detailed about that. But just being like, hey, this is what the room used to be and this is why it's empty, I don't think that's necessary. You could just say the room's kind of empty, right? And you can leave it to the player's imagination, the GM, to pick up on the details. When you're dealing with a book this big, it seems like being terse in your writing is a good thing, and being kind of cutting back on extraneous stuff. And I wonder if that's going to be throughout. Sometimes it looks like the rooms are much shorter, like much more punchy and to the point. Recreation area, right? This room was once richly furnished with round tables, chairs, chases, and carpets. Now the furniture is shattered and ruined, and the carpets are overgrown with sickly orange mold. The mold smells quite foul, but is harmless. So that gives you a better sense of... It's just a very short description. Okay, cool. Cool. Cave of the Moon Pearl. That's a much longer room. Let me read through this one. Cave of the Moon Pearl. This is room 28. So let me flip back to room 28 and see where that is. Okay, so this is... Okay, it's this larger area down here. It's a larger cave in the cave system on the southern side of the map. Okay, this cave is illuminated by a shaft of light that enters from a small opening in the ceiling 50 feet above and shines down onto a reflecting pond below, the famous Moon Pool of Dwimmermount. The moon pool holds what alchemists refer to as true water, a primordial liquid untainted by physical contaminants and highly prized for its mystical properties. True water never boils, evaporates, or freezes, and cannot be altered or destroyed with even the mightiest of spells. Indeed, true water acts as a supernatural solvent, dissolving magical energies within itself. See Appendix A for new magic items for more details on true water. Okay, so that's cool, but if you have an appendix entry for this item, you don't need to have this whole paragraph here. Just link it. Say, referred to as true water. See page 334. Stuff like that. And you don't need to duplicate. double up. Granted, like most of the time, I'm appreciative when people put the stat block or the monster stat or whatever it is right on the page. But if you have an entry in the back of the book for it and you're hyperlinked, then I say just go back to the entry. You don't need to duplicate, especially when you're in a book this big and kind of this ponderous. You want to make everything as efficient as possible. Now, these are, this is hindsight. This is looking at somebody else's work and saying, hey, you should have done this differently. And I understand that that's, I haven't created a work like this, and I should make that clear. I'm just impressed by all this. But you can, you get a sense for what you're dealing with in these sorts of descriptions in these longer rooms. So, okay, anyway, in the case of the moon pool, the magical energies it dissolves are moon rays, called lunar emanations by sages. These moon rays can be imbibed by living beings who partake of the pool's contents, altering their magical potency in accordance with the phases of the moon. A mage or other character familiar with astronomy will be aware that new moons lessen the caster's power but open his mind to new insights, while a full moon strengthens the caster's potency but narrows his focus. In game terms, drinking from the moon pool has the following effects. X caster level plus X caster level means that for spells that have variable effects based on level, for example, Fireball, the caster is treated as a designated level X higher than he actually is. +1 spell means that the character gains an additional spell of the type indicated, lowest or highest level, for the duration of the moon pool's infused water is in effect. Obviously, effects stated as a penalty function in reverse. A character who drinks from the moon pool must make a saving throw versus spells. Success indicates that the effect listed above is operative according to the current phase of the moon. The effect lasts for a number of days equal to 1 plus the difference between the saving throw number and the number rolled by the player for his character. For example, a 6th level mage requires a 12 to save against spells. If his player rolls a 14, the appropriate effect lasts for 3 days. Failure means that the appropriate effect is not operative, and subsequent drinks from the moon pool have no effect for a number of days equal to the amount by which the character failed his saving throw. For that matter, while one effect is operative, subsequent drinks provide no additional effect, good or bad. Finally, moon pool effects cannot be dispelled by any known means. A character who is drunk from its waters must wait until the appropriate number of days have passed before its effects will fade. If characters scale up the walls around the pool to reach the opening in the ceiling overhead, they find it is actually the mouth of a vertical tunnel just big enough for humans to squeeze through. This tunnel ascends another 50 feet upward, eventually terminating in a narrow crevasse in a mountain face overlooking the stone wrought stairs. While the perimeter barrier was activated, only moonlight could pass through the shaft, but with the perimeter's deactivation, the shaft of the moon pool became an unguarded and little-traveled entrance into Dwimmermount. Okay. Well, I think a lot of that writing is overly ponderous for what you're actually getting. Yeah. The actual effect is you're considered to be a higher or lower level caster, or you get extra spell slots. Yeah, okay. Cool. That's a cool effect. But that's a lot of writing to say that. And I get it that they're trying to be very, very precise. I get that. You're trying to make it very clear what is meant. But I think there's a time when you can kind of trust the GM. You can be like, people who drink... And like the idea that it's like the difference between the success and the failure is the number of days that you get the effect for, that you can't get the penalty for. Yeah. I see that again. Okay. Fair enough. In operation, I probably wouldn't do this. All right, I'd probably just be like, yeah, if you drink from the pool, you make a save, and if you succeed, you get an extra spell slot, or you're considered to be higher level for something. Or if you fail it, you're considered to be lower level for casting for 24 hours or until the moon phase changes or something like that. Yeah. But again, that's, in terms of execution, the idea is really cool. It's a lot of writing to get that idea across. I think you can trust the GM. Indicate what you're talking about, and then move on. And I think a lot of the times in this book it does that. It seems to. The spawn of Arachnaka. This large chamber is the lair of the demonic spider, known only as the spawn of Arachnaka. The spawn tricked the dwarf Guran into pledging himself to its demonic master in exchange for the power to transform inert dwarves into kobolds. Oh. The spawn now uses Guran and the kobolds to extend the reach of its master into Dwimmermount. If confronted by characters powerful enough to pose a threat, the spawn will attempt to seduce them to its service with similar promises of power from its evil lord. It has a seductive voice that belies its hideous appearance, an intuitive sense of what appeals to mortals. Whether the spawn's promises and pacts are mere lies or will be honored by Arachnaka is left for the judge to decide, but certainly Chaos takes an active interest in Dwimmermount. The spawn possesses little treasure of its own, 2 gems, malachite and zircon, worth 10 gold pieces, 100 gold pieces respectively, but secreted in its layer is a weird metal disc with a cross and circle symbol on it that can be used to operate the elevator. Okay, cool. The thing to take away from all of this is that there's a lot of writing and you have to read it all if you want to run the dungeon as written. And that there are details that are important that are hidden within the paragraph, that you got to read the whole thing. And there aren't a lot of bullet points or easy references given to you. What I would probably recommend is, because there are good margins here, I would do what's already been presented here, which is make a lot of notes in the margins as you go through. Just use, type text in and just add it in. That's probably what I would do. I don't know. Maybe not. But that's probably what I would do as you go through. If you're going to, play it from a PDF. If you're going to play it from a printed version, then you can just write in the margins. But this book seems like the kind of book you're going to want to do some work on. Underlining, arrows, extra notes in the margins, Post-its, sticky notes maybe, or have your own binder with a lot of, indices and things like that to connect. So the level of the dungeon is 64 rooms? No, 68 rooms. And it goes right into level 2. There's some great art in here too. I like the one on the left especially. Okay, so having looked at one room of the dungeon, one floor of the dungeon, what strikes me is that, of course, it seems relatively stealable, right? I mean, you can just take this one floor of the dungeon and move it to something else. You wouldn't have to run this as part of Dwimmermount. And I wonder, I'm going to read forward, not obviously, I think in this video, I'm going to call it pretty soon here, but in a future video, or at least on my own, I'm going to read through more of the floors, and I want to see if that's true for all of them, because if so, then this is a really useful book, because it's basically full of dungeons, right? You just don't think of them as interconnected, and you can suddenly have a dungeon that you take out and put elsewhere. And I think you could make a dwarven cave out of this. It looks like there are some bosses and some factions, kobolds. You have this arachna demon thing, which can promise power and has... So it looks like there are there's enough going on in this dungeon, this level of the dungeon, to make it a standalone dungeon. That's cool. And so even if you didn't want to run this as a full-on Megadungeon, you would be able to use at least this floor as its own thing. And I wonder if that's true for all the different floors. I would imagine it is, and that's certainly true for Arden Vul. It's certainly true for a lot of Megadungeons, where you can take bits and kind of run them on their own. And I think that would be true for this as well. Okay, so what are my first impressions based on one level of this dungeon out of 13, very briefly reading through it, looking through the intro and something. I think this is a totally solid Megadungeon so far. Again, I have to look forward, and I think there might be, really cool stuff on later levels of the dungeon. It might be really cool. It could get worse. I don't know. But at least looking at that first, it looks like a totally serviceable, solid Megadungeon. I'm not, blown away or super psyched or shocked by it. It falls into a little middle space for me where it's certainly not bad by any means. I would not give this, this is like a B plus in terms of what I've seen of it. Good solid execution, but nothing that makes me go, aha, look at that design choice, or look at this really cool way of approaching this, or something that... What I'm looking for when I'm looking at a Megadungeon, or really at any dungeon, is how hard would it be for me to come up with what is being presented here? And I think based on what I've seen so far, it wouldn't be too difficult to recreate this myself. That's not true for things like Ave Nox, right? It's not true for things like anomalous subsurface environment. At least in a lot of the weird and gonzo and bizarre things that are down there. It's certainly not true for Arden Vul. I don't think I could recreate that. I think I could probably recreate Dwimmermount, which means it has less value to me. Now, a lot of work went into this, and so if I wanted to recreate this, quote unquote, it would take just an insanely long time, which is why I'm really glad I have this, and I'm definitely going to try to pilfer it for stuff, right? Not because, but in my mind, it's not oh man, I gotta have that. This is more about, wow, that's cool. I'm glad I have this, and it's going to save me a lot of time if I want to make a kind of standard dungeon, or even Megadungeon. But if I were going to run a full Megadungeon from beginning to end, I wouldn't probably pick this one. And again, there are reasons why I might pick others. I might pick Anomalous Subsurface Environment because I want this weird gonzo kind of science fantasy weirdness, like really bizarre creatures and monsters and treasure from the very beginning. And I might pick something like Arden Vul because I want this profoundly impressive, massive work with really cool sensibilities and design, cool dungeon layouts and factions and NPCs that are interesting and engaging, I think. I might pick Ave Nox for its relatively short form and its grotesque, bizarre kind of horror vibe. And I think there are lots of other Megadungeons that I would point to and say, aha, this is why I would use this. This is why I might pick this for this group or that group. For Dwimmermount, so far, and again, I'm one floor in, but so far I would say it doesn't stand out to me as something I'd have to run, or that I probably wouldn't go to it as a go-to. But that being said, it is maybe hyper proficient, maybe the way to put it. It is a solid adventure from what I can tell. It looks totally competent, and the amount of work that went into this, the writing that went into this, I have a lot of respect for that, because I have not the patience to write as much as the people who put this together. So I'll put a link below to where you guys can get Dwimmermount. And if you guys want, I'll do another video where I go through more floors. For now, I'm going to leave it there, and on my own time, I'm going to read through the rest of this dungeon and get a sense of the whole. I'm going to go back and read through the introduction and kind of look through some of those more details and see if it stands out a bit more, and if I get more drawn into the world that's being described here. But anyway, all right, guys, that'll do it in this video. Hope it's been interesting, and I'll see you all in another one.